Well, hello, guys, and welcome to the next episode of Tales from the Triptych. Tonight we are talking all about vintage vinyl, how to identify vinyl, what press you might have, and just some tips when you're out there looking at records so you know what you have. And Louie's very excited about the triptych tonight. And we also have my trusty sidekicks, Patrick and Nate, joining in to complete the triptych. So, Nate and Patrick,
hello, everyone.
Hello.
How you doing tonight? We've got, thanks for having us on your channel. Looking forward to learning more about vintage vinyl. We've already got some people signing in. So I have a feeling one of them is really going to be interested in your collection because their screen name is Doowop54.
Oh, so, Bob's in the chat.
Hello, Bob. Hi, Doowop54. I have a feeling you might have an interest in some vintage vinyl.
I think Bob does. He's been a record collector and a book collector for a long time, and he's always on Johnny G's Vinyl Treasure Show, which if you love 50s and 60s doo-wop music, Johnny's got a great collection with all original vinyl that he plays on Saturday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern here on YouTube. So it is a great live record show.
Great. We've got Sam Doyen here. Hi, Sam. Cam. Hi, Cam. Hi. Nice to see you here. Edward. Al Unico Ono. Hello, Edward. Who else have we got?
I got Dana from Grace 2010H is joining us. Delbert came in, proud American, so he's also here.
Gina Marie. Hi, Gina.
Welcome, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. My goal with this triptych is to teach all of you about vinyl and what kind of presses that you might run into and what you have when you are looking at vinyl, because not all vinyl is actually the same. There are definitely different presses that can affect value and collectability and rarity. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I see Auntie Christy joining in and Pat Robinson and Tim from Canada.
Yeah, Tim came in from Canada. It's got Sandy coming in from Michigan.
Carrie
Christy
is here.
Yep, Christy representing the West Coast.
Tia Fane's here. Hi, Tim.
Welcome, folks.
So I think your notifications have gone out. Got Angela coming in from Illinois. I just saw her earlier today.
That is fantastic. It was a great photo, by the way.
Well, it was a good photo of me. I think Angela had she was so overwhelmed by my gloriousness, she closed her eyes.
Her brother didn't quite get that picture just right, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. It just gives us a reason to meet again.
That's right.
And Randy Grossglasses came in. Helen from New England Thrifters joined us.
Val's here. Hello, Val.
Hey, Val. Hey, guys. Thank you again for joining tonight. This is our 5th episode of Tales from the Triptych, and this is just so exciting. Now, the first picture that I've got up here on the screen, this is a very fun memory for me. My dad came to visit a little while ago, and we went to one of my favorite record stores, Tiger Records, and my dad actually found an original press of the Chirping Crickets on Coral for me. He was digging through a bin and said, "Oh, I think this is something you'd like," and he was right indeed. So this was a fun memory, great moment with my dad. So I wanted to open with this photo, and we'll talk more about pressings and what they mean and what kind of things you're going to be finding out.
Well, I've already got my first questions. You said on Coral, is that a label? I've never heard of Coral.
Coral, yes, is an earlier label, and Buddy Holly recorded on Coral. So you'll find that there are literally thousands of different label variations and labels when you get into especially vintage vinyl, but even more modern vinyl. There's just tons of labels. And so I'll show a little bit of the record label variances here in just a second.
Great. Hello, Tammy. Nice to see you.
Hi, Tammy. All right, folks, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first thing that we're going to take a look at tonight is how vinyl records are made. I think this will really give a good insight into vinyl, how they're made, and then a little reason behind the different pressings. So let's take a look and see how vinyl's actually made.
Before all the music in the world could be played on this, and yes, even before this, you had to get a turntable, set the needle, and play this. In 1948, Columbia released the very first long play, or LP, vinyl record. This 20-minute recording began a major music revolution until the rise of cassettes and CDs toppled vinyl from its throne. Still, die-hard music enthusiasts held on to the vinyl tradition, and it didn't take long for it to launch a comeback tour. In 2016, 3.2 million LPs were sold, the most in 25 years. To keep up with demand, the OG LP producer, United Record Pressing, had to move to a bigger location here in Nashville, Tennessee. It's the musical encore many audiophiles have been waiting for. To make a hit record, you first need a hit song. A band or musician will record their masterpiece in a studio, then send the high-quality file to a sound engineer. In this room full of machines, an engineer will use Pro Tools to level out the music before connecting it to the cutting amps. These amps feed directly to the cutting link, decked out with an actual ruby chisel. As the song plays, the vibrating ruby engraves specific grooves into a lacquer disc, each cut signifying a different sound wave. Fun fact, if you yell close to the ruby, it will engrave your sound waves and your voice will be recorded. A single disc can hold up to 2,600 feet of lines, enough to span the length of 7 football fields. The first lacquer disc is the mother disc, used as a mold to create a master stamp. Each master can be used to press about 100,000 records. First, the disc gets washed, then sprayed with chloride, followed by liquid silver to fill in the grooves. Once the silver is layered on, the disc is dipped into a nickel solution for several hours. This hardens the silver into a layer that can then be peeled away, cut, trimmed, and perfected. United Record Recording has a special way of safely archiving and cataloging the masters, and they have thousands in their library. It's time to add a little heat. To make the actual vinyl record, polyvinyl chloride pellets are melted down in the hopper into a biscuit-shaped puck. The presses first apply labels, which center the record and keep it from warping. Then, the 2 silver stamps are placed on either side of the puck, and over 60 tons of pressure flatten the vinyl into a thin blade. Lastly, the excess vinyl, known as flash, is shaved off and saved for reuse. The final result? A record less than 2 millimeters thick, but coated with the secret language of music. Of course, all this work might be for nothing if the final record doesn't sound right. That's why you have Hunter, who is one of the many people in charge of production quality control. His job entails sitting in this room and listening to records all day long. QCs look for warping and listen for any ticks, pops, and weird noises that might show up during the stamping process. This takes a good ear and some serious concentration. Once they sign off, the record is ready for assembly.
So that, folks, is how a vinyl record is actually pressed. It's a pretty detailed process, but it's pretty cool. And one of the things I find totally interesting is when you look at how they're made, you saw those big stampers. Well, those stampers can only press about 10,000 records or so before they wear out. Now, that is a lot of records, but once they wear out, if the record is popular enough, then they might need to do another run and repress records. So that gets into our next topic, which is what different types of record presses are there. And typically, collectors, true vinyl diehard collectors, always are looking for the true first press, which was released to the public before it was repressed. Now, there are some different records where people claim that the second pressing actually sounds better than the first, so that pressing might get a little bit more hype and be more collectible than others. But for the most part, people want the true first press because typically the sound will be better because you've got the records that are closest to the original recording, closest to that mother, and of course before all the stampers wear out. So that's one of the reasons first presses or original presses are so important to collectors. So let's
Katie,
before
you go on, Katie, what was it that brought vinyl back just recently, that they sold 3.2 million vinyls in that year? What precipitated that going back to vinyl?
That's a great question, Nate. I think several things, really. You know, in the 90s, vinyl kind of went away, CD was in, but people started to learn that CD wasn't all it was cracked up to be. CD is actually what we call compressed music. So basically, it is not the way the artist intended for you to listen to the original song. Compressed music is like taking an orchestra and then cramming it down. You're not really hearing all that warm dynamic sound. And I think people started to realize that. Also, there was this need to get back to the physical. You know, we live in an era where everything is streamed and everything is online, and at a fingertip, you can press a button and play a song, which is awesome. But there's still this need to collect, to have physical media. That's why so many people are going back now to actually owning DVDs or VHSs or tape cassettes, or even coming back a little bit. And so people want that physical media, but they also are realizing the amazing possibility with sound the vinyl has to offer, because when you listen to a vinyl record, you really, really get this warm, dynamic, amazing sound that you can't get if you're streaming music. It's just a whole experience that is amazing. And I think people really want to get back to that. And hopefully, with all of these new records that are coming out, more and more people will get into the vinyl hobby.
Great.
Really quick, I want to throw first, there are a lot of people that have joined in. So quick hellos to Peterson, Releve Vintage, Cam's Folly, Mid-Century Wasted. So thanks everyone for jumping on. And I encourage you to go back and watch the video that Katie just showed. So you'll have to go back after we're done to see that. But I had a question. This is actually my question from watching that pressing. So it's fascinating, the whole idea of those silver discs, and that those are what that actually gets wear out. And that makes a lot of sense. But the vinyl that they're pressing, that black, I don't know if they said it was PVC or whatever type of vinyl that was.
PVC.
Is it heated at the time that is being? Because when they showed it being trimmed off, they said that excess would be reused. So is it heated, or is it actually, is it a pliable material in its raw form?
It's melted back down and heated into a new vinyl. Of course, with vinyl that has been recycled, there is a big sort of disagreement within the vinyl community, I could say, on the sound quality. You know, a lot of things affect sound of a record. Not every record you get just because it's a vinyl is magically going to sound amazing. And a lot of people do not care for records that have been recycled because they feel that it has a sound that's subpar to what a new vinyl record would sound like with new PVC pellets. So you can really take a deep dive into that if you want. Of course, you know, collectors and true record enthusiasts will really have their own opinion on records, what press sounds better, and you know, what system sounds better. There's a whole world of vinyl you can get into, and everyone has their own opinions. And you'll find that in the vinyl community when you're watching videos or you're following certain record channels. Everyone's going to have their own opinion, and it definitely is something that's disagreeable. But the main, I think, agreement within the vinyl community is that collecting vinyl is just so much fun. It really is an amazing experience, and the sound, for the most part, is just amazing. It's something that can't be rivaled with modern compressed music.
So that's really interesting that there would be that aspect of, you know, not necessarily conflict, but, you know, discussion. So in order to support that, would the manufacturers, if they would, obviously they have to trim off that excess after it's, you know, lack of a better term, squished out from the sides of the plates, it has to be cut off. Would they then not reuse that in the first pressing? Would that be something that would be set aside until they did a later pressing? Or could it actually still get put back into the first pressing?
You know, that's something I don't know, Patrick. I think it really does depend on the pressing plant. Of course, there's a big movement now to be conscious of environmental things. So people are always trying to recycle and reuse and all of that. But of course, many folks in the vinyl community do not care for recycled vinyl. So it really just does depend. But you can have a recycled vinyl that sounds good. It's just sort of subjective. Music is subjective. Sound quality is subjective. You know, you could line up 3 people and play a recycled vinyl record, and one person could say, "Oh, that's horrible. I can hear this like surface noise I don't like, and then 2 other people can be like, oh yeah, that's fine. So, you know, it's all what you want to collect and what you're interested in.
Excellent.
Okay, so here is a little example of different pressings. Now, these are terms, folks, that you're going to hear when you're out there collecting. You'll see this online a lot. There's different terms people use: original pressing, first pressing, repressing, and remaster. There's also a term that I use frequently, reissue. I consider that very similar to a repress. One of my favorite vinyl channels is Vinylize. I love Jarrett New. He's just got some fabulous content if you're just getting into the hobby. And he is going to talk a little bit here about the different pressings.
So first off, an original pressing means the original release of that record. This was the very first time that that album, EP, or single was ever pressed and released to the public. You could also call this the vintage pressing, or original issue, or even OG press. I'm not kidding. That's what some people call it. So for example, the Beatles' first album, Please Please Me, was released in mono by the Parlophone record label in the UK in 1963. And if you bought one of those during that time, you would have the original pressing, or the original issue. Now, that's not to be confused with a first pressing, which is a record that was pressed from the first original masters. Test pressings and acetate pressings are good examples of this because they're the first records pressed before the other commercial releases. So since they're so close to the masters, they have a better sound quality and they usually fetch a much higher price tag. These are like the holy grails of record collecting. They're very rare, and a lot
Everyone
of people
wants the records closest to the masters.
So if you plan on buying one of these first pressings, you should also do some research and make sure that what you're getting is in fact legitimate. So you're going to want to pay attention to those other small details, like its country of origin, the year that it was pressed, the record label that pressed it, and if it was pressed in either mono or stereo. So essentially, before you spend your entire life savings on a quote-unquote first pressing, make sure it's not a bootleg. That would suck. All right, now moving on, a repressing is defined as an album, EP, or single that is pressed again from the original master. So although this could be the second, third, fourth, or 20th batch of records pressed at that plant, the source material is the same. And because they're using the same masters, the repressing should have the exact same identical sound quality as the original pressing. All right, now finally, a remaster is when a record company makes a brand new master of a given recording in order to improve its sound quality. So basically, they're editing the digital files of the original masters in order to add more bass, correct the pitch, reduce noise, or improve it in some other way. So although that might seem like a good idea on the surface, here's where you run into problems. When you start messing around with all of those masters, you could accidentally make the sound even worse. And this is where we run into stuff like the loudness wars and overcompression and stuff that you just don't want on your record. So basically, unless it was remastered by a skilled engineer like Bob Katz, the sound quality might be a toss-up. Could sound good, could sound terrible. So yet again, do your homework. Now, keeping all of this stuff in mind, the main goal for any record collector is to buy a record that has the best sound quality possible. And that's the reason why so many people use these terms in the first place. However, there are a myriad of other factors that can affect the sound, such as, did they use brand new vinyl pellets or were they recycled? How much of it did they use? Was it standard weight, 180 gram, 200 gram? Who is the record mastering engineer? Did they use digital masters or analog? Did they use compression? And if so, how much compression? Did they overdo the compression? Also, what record label pressed this record in the first place? Was it a high quality company like Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab or Music on Vinyl? Or was it someone else? And if it was someone else, how's the quality control at their specific record pressing plant? All of that stuff, I would argue, is even more important than if the record itself is an original pressing, a repressing, or a remaster. But what do you guys think about this? Do you?
So this is a very interesting video here. You learned a little bit about the different terms that you see when you're out looking at vinyl records. Now, I do think that Adam Jarrett New is on to a point here that a lot of other factors do affect sound. But for collectors, most people have that thrill to actually find the original press. You know, there's something about that, like, ooh, I got the first press released to the public. It's sort of a fun collecting journey. But also, a lot of people do believe it does sound better, and I think in some cases it does, especially when you get into 50s records and mono and stereo, which we'll get into a little bit later. So let's take a look at why you actually need to know what press you have. Well, I want to show this website here. This is PopPsych, and this is a website that can be a little confusing to navigate, but I really like it for record values. This is sort of like a worth point for records. So you can type in a record here, as I've typed in Marvelettes, Please Mr. Postman, and you will find all of the different solds from different years. Now they do different websites, Discogs, eBay, I think is all listed on here. So it really does help you kind of get a feel for what some of the records are going for. Now I'm not going to speak too much on value here, but this is one of the reasons why it matters what press you have. So if you're looking here at this website, you will find that all of the records here for the Marvelettes, Please Mr. Postman, when you get down to this list, are original pressings. Now, these are the first presses on the Tamala label with that white label. This is a true original. And depending on the condition, you can see this one is VG++. This one was near mint. It can sell for a pretty penny. So you want to know what press you have because it does affect value. It affects collectability, rarity, all those kinds of things really do matter. So it's important to know what press you have when you are looking at records. And this Marvelettes record is one of my very favorites. I love the Marvelettes. And this is a tough record to trace down, even in semi-good condition. So if you do find it, you really can fetch a pretty penny. These prices are not out of the range of what they really would sell for. Now let's take a look at this record here. Now this is the Marvelettes, Please Mr. Postman, but this is the reissue from 1982. Look at this label here. It's a Motown label, so it's not the white Tamala label, and the cover is completely different. You'll see the Motown label down here. It does not have the Tamala globe that this one has up in the corner. You can see the globe up here, so you'll see the differences. And you'll notice that this record, if you look it up online, sells for about $42.50, depending on condition. The reissue is still pretty tough to find, and it is sought after because the original goes for hundreds. But knowing the differences is really important in this case because you can see that this record isn't selling for a ton. So there's a lot of times you'll go onto eBay and you'll see people just kind of confused about what they have. And that is how I've gotten a really good deal on some records in the past, because you've got people that just find, you know, vinyl at an estate sale and they say, oh, I think I've heard of this group. It's pretty collectible. I'll throw it up on eBay for 20 bucks. And, you know, I've gotten lucky that way. But if you're a reseller or you're someone that's collecting vinyl, it really matters what press you have to know kind of the true value. So I highly recommend if you're looking up records and you want to know values, definitely use eBay. Go to the sold, see what it's selling for. Also, this PopPsych website is pretty good as well for record values. So that's really why you need to know what press you have.
A quick question that came in for a couple of clarifications. So Record Crate is commenting that he believes PopPsych is only going to show sold comps from eBay. Do you know if that's the case, or does it carry other sold comps as well?
Adam, you may be right. I've been told that it does other solds as well, but I could be wrong on that. So if Adam believes that that's true, I highly recommend agreeing with what Adam says, because Adam is a longtime record collector and owns a record store, so he's very knowledgeable. So yeah, this one you can see here is sold at eBay. So you just take a look at the solds and see where they're coming from. But using this at least will give you kind of a generalization of what some of the records are selling for.
And related to that, Jeannie Lyle is asking if you have actual print reference books that you use or could recommend that would also cover this topic?
You know, that's difficult. There are a lot of books that you can get on record collecting, and you can buy certain catalog books. I think the values in all of those books, as we've talked about, even with vintage books that we find for, say, glass or other types of collectibles, the values are out of date. So they're really only going to help you kind of identify records. They're not really great for this kind of thing. So definitely your online market is your best bet. And values and collectability on records do change on the daily. You know, there might be someone that finds a whole bunch of these records somewhere and suddenly the market's flooded with them. You know, so as more kind of come up from people's collections or from basements or, you know, older folks' homes, you'll find that maybe the values on them change as more become available, or maybe they become more scarce because everybody really wants a certain record because it's gotten a lot of hype and now that record's hard to find, so the prices go up.
And Blake made a similar comment saying that values just change too quickly for something from the print books. So online will be the master.
It really is. But I do find, you know, with some of these 50s records, because that's mainly, folks, when I collect and enjoy, I love that era of music. You'll find that with 50s records, you know, some of them are just still so hard to find that they really can be worth some money. So don't discount your 50s records at your antique stores or wherever you shop, because some of them can be true first presses and be worth some money. So we've talked a little bit about why you need to know what press you have. Now let's talk a little bit about how you actually identify what press you have. Well, it really is, folks, all in the details. And there's several ways that you can identify a record pressing. The most common and best surefire way is to learn about the matrix number. Now, what is a matrix number? You've probably heard me talk about this a lot. Well, a matrix number is a series of numbers and letters, sometimes with signatures of the mastering engineer and symbols that are inscribed in the dead wax of a record. Now, what the dead wax of a record is it's that space between the label and the run out groove. So you can see here there's a smooth space, and you'll see on this record there's a little number and series of letters inscribed. That is your matrix number, and basically that code will tell you all about the record. It can tell you sometimes what pressing plant it came from. It can tell you whether it's mono or stereo. It can tell you the year. It can tell you what press. Sometimes the mastering engineer might sign the record and put his signature in it, and some of those can be very collectible. You might even find that certain bands will write funny messages in the dead wax and encode some fun things in there. So the matrix number is really the surefire way to identify what pressing you have, but there's a couple of other ways as well. You can identify records by the different labels, and there are thousands of label variations over the years from different companies and labels that no longer exist. And you can look for details on the record jacket. You know, sometimes the record jacket, like I showed with that Marvelettes record, the Tamala globe is in the corner of the one, but the other one does not have the globe. So you know that the one with the globe is the original. And you can also use catalog numbers. Now, the catalog numbers are not the best way because sometimes they use the same catalog numbers on reissues, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So that's really some of the ways that you can identify your vinyl. Now I'm going to show you a little clip here from one of my other favorite vinyl channels, Noble Records, and he's going to show you a little bit about the label variances and one of the ways you can use them to identify your vinyl.
So that is where you're going to find a lot of your information also. Now, probably the most obvious thing that you can see on a record other than the cover is the label. And the label can sometimes tell you, narrow down kind of what pressing it is as well. Different record labels had different label variations throughout the year. So there's a lot of good information on the label. I'll use Bob Dylan as an example again. So this is Bob Dylan's first record, and it's got the promo sticker on it, the Columbia promo sticker. A lot of times promos are first pressings, but not always. Sometimes they did promos for reissues as well. So you can't always, I've heard it both ways, but I've seen a lot that are not actually first presses. But most of the time they are. So this Bob Dylan, right?
And we haven't had that story.
Editing and adding pieces
Oh,
of
that
my-
goes along with
in
this
the time
territory.
this album came out. only the very first pressings have the 6i. So you talk about the Columbia label. They call this a 6i because there's 6 of those little Columbia logos on there. So this is the early 60s, late like 50s, early 60s, up to like 62. They did this 6i, and then this was the last record that Bob Dylan's had on the 6i, and like I said, only the first pressings have it. If you have a 6i of this, it's really rare and worth more than you probably think. But this album came out afterwards, and it's got what they call the Columbia 2i. So this is not a lesson on Bob Dylan, but the 2i and see the 2 little Columbia labels. That's just the record collector slang, but that tells you where that record lands as far as their label catalog is.
So you can see there's definitely a difference in the labels on that Bob Dylan record. And if you find that Bob Dylan record with the 6i Columbia label, you have a true first press. Now, I talked a little bit about this. There's different terms that you will use when you talk about presses. And a lot of collectors use the term first press as original press, sort of interchangeably. I know we looked at that vinylized video, and he had mentioned that technically true first pressings are really the acetate pressings and some of the early promos that come out before the general release to the public. And that is the technical correct definition. But most people in the vinyl community understand that first press, original press, kind of just means the first one released to the public. So you will hear that terminology interchanged. Now that does show you a little bit about the label variances there on Columbia. And I want to showcase this website as well. I use this as a great way to look up different labels because you can find out what label was around during a certain time that a record was made. So if you're looking for a particular 50s record, you might be able to look up the Atlantic discography, which is a great terminology if you're looking for different labels, and find, okay, that record came out in 1954. Let me see what Atlantic label was used during that time period, and then you can find basically your record that way. That's just one of the other identifiers you can use besides the matrix number. So you'll see here, this is just some of the Atlantic labels, and there's a lot of variances in different labels in their design, color, and shape. Well, they're all round, but the shapes that are used within the Atlantic logo you see are very, very different. This also showcases just the different chest labels that were around. Here's a bunch of different chest labels. So the labels also can give you some identifiers as well when identifying records. So let's actually go to Discogs, and I'm going to show you how I research a record. Now, this website is one of the best websites, in my opinion, and widely used in the vinyl community to research records, to learn about music. This is like your Wikipedia and eBay for records all rolled in one. Now, I'm a big fan of supporting your local record stores. I always say if you can buy vinyl from a local record store, highly, highly recommend that. But if you can't find something that you want at a local store, Discogs is a really good online marketplace to find maybe some of those more obscure records that you are looking for. So I like Discogs a lot and highly, highly recommend it. Now, Discogs is not perfect. It is one of the largest catalogs of music around, but there are errors, just like with any human website. So you kind of have to do some research too and double check that Discogs is right. But for the most part, everything that I'm showing today, I believe is 100% accurate. Now, I saw Doo-Wop Bob in the chat was mentioning another website called 45Cat. And I like 45Cat a lot, but there are errors on that website. So I recommend Discogs if you can. But if you're into the 50s music, 45Cat is a good website as well. So let's start off with Discogs. I've gone to their page. And one of the ways that you can actually look up a record is search for the artist. So I have typed in already for you guys the Clovers. Here's the Clovers, one of my very favorite doo-wop groups. They're from DC, formed in 1946. And the cool thing about this is not only will it give you all of their albums, give you a little write-up about the group. Now, sometimes this could be a little off, especially when you get into members, with 50s records and so forth. But it is pretty cool to have just a little introduction into the group. And then if you scroll down, you'll find that all of the records are listed here. So here are the releases. And you can filter these if you want. So you can filter just albums, you can filter to compilations, singles, and extended play records. So really you have a lot of options. And then you can sort by the year, by the label. I mean, you can do a lot with Discogs if you really want to. So the first thing I've done is gone to Discogs. I'm looking for the Clovers. I've typed that in. I see all their records listed here. The one that I'm interested in finding out about is this one here, which came out on the Atlantic label in 1956. So I'm going to click on this record. Now you'll see that it will give you the track list and the year. And then if you scroll down here, it will show you that there are 13 different versions of this record. And so that's why it matters to know what press you have. So this goes in order. So you'll see that the true original first press was an LP mono on the Atlantic label. There's its catalog number. Its country of origin was the US, and it was 1956. Now, there are Canadian pressings and other things depending on how this record got distributed, but the true first press we want is in the US. So we're going to click on that, and it's going to show us all the track list. It's going to show us the label, the catalog number, and then if you click on the More Images button, you'll actually get an up-close look at the label. So this is how you can kind of use Discogs to look up records. And you'll be able to see the back of the record, so all of the details of the covers are there if you want to do that. And then it will tell you on the bottom, not all records have this, but most do. Usually it will give you, if you scroll down, it will show you the matrix number for the true first pressing or original press. So that is very, very, very helpful. So I'm going to show you another way that you can look up records on Discogs is you can actually do the advanced search tool. So if you have a matrix number that you want to look up, you can type it in here, or you can type in the label, the track title, catalog number, any type of barcode identifiers. The list for this advanced search really goes on, and then you can hit search and it will pull up usually the record, especially if you type in the matrix number there. So this advanced search is very helpful, but usually most of the things that you're going to find is by artist, by just typing it in, and you'll be able to research the records from there. Now,
well, that's really quite comprehensive, isn't it?
It really is. That's the amazing thing about Discogs is I don't know how they compiled all of this information, but I mean, this has some of the most obscure records on it as well as common records. So this website will have almost, I guarantee you, everything that you could ever want to look for. Now, the other thing that you can do on Discogs, which is pretty cool, is search the marketplace. So I clicked on this original mono release here and say I'm looking to buy this record. I'm really interested to buy it, or I want to see what it's maybe going for on the market. So I can click here on Marketplace. See, there's 73 for sale. Now it will say from $5. You'll see that there are different conditions. This is where the value really is important, and the condition is really important. So you see here, it will say sleeve condition is very good plus, and the media condition is just very good. It will also show you, if you scroll down, you'll find that sometimes it will show this. See this RE? That's a reissue, and it's mint. So the reissue is not going for as much as the original. Now, you'll also find that, as I mentioned, the condition is really important. So if you go here onto Discogs, it will show you how to grade items. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is important. You want to make sure you're getting a vinyl that's in good condition and that will play, because not all records are going to play. So you'll see here some basic grading terminology here. There's mint. That means that it's absolutely perfect. Sometimes that even means it could be still sealed. You have near mint or mint minus. And then you have very good plus. Now this works for CDs too, or tapes, or anything that you want to grade, but this is really how you grade music. This is, as they say, generally worth 50% of the near mint value. It depends, again, on how hard the record is to find, but good VG plus will play. There might be some surface noises, some clicks and pops, but it will play pretty well. So I try to always buy records that are at least a VG plus or higher. Unless with 50s records, as I talked about, sometimes they're so hard to find that you do kind of have to go down a couple of grades. Very good is just okay. It will play, but there's going to be some definite surface noises because scratches and dust and all that stuff do affect noise. Good plus is not good. Good is not good. Poor and fair, that's basically like the record's going to really have some serious sound quality issues because of the scratches. There might be warps, there might be skipping. So that's basically how you grade records. And when you're using Discogs, you'll see that they always list the media condition and the jacket condition here in the marketplace. And then of course this one, you can see it's in a really, really good condition for this record, because this record is not the easiest to find. So if you click on it here, it will tell you the matrix numbers, so you can verify that it is a true first pressing or original press. You'll see it's the Atlantic 809, that's the catalog number, tell you when it was released, give you the track list, and then some sellers will list additional comments about it. Like here, you'll see disc has some light noise, jacket has some light ring wear, and then you can decide on that. And if you need to know more about the condition, like what does this mean, you just click on that and it will bring this page back up. So that's a little bit on grading records, but we're not going to talk about that too much today.
Okay, before you too much for, go ahead, Nate.
So I found that interesting because I've been recently collecting banknotes, and the way banknotes are graded use terms like fine and good is not good quality, and fine is not particularly fine.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting, Nate.
One of the some questions that are kept coming in through the chat were a couple of clarifications. Before you went into the grading, you had talked about the singles that you're showing, and Releve is asking for a clarification of exactly what a single would be considered, asking if it's a 45. And then you were talking about the sleeve condition. Are all 45s going to be in sleeves, or would the older ones be actually boxed?
So 45s come in the 45, the smaller records with the center hole. And 45s can come in sleeves, paper sleeves, or you can have a box set of 45. So it does depend on what record you're getting. And if you get like a compilation box set, you'll find this a lot. There's a lot of reissues coming out, like of the Beatles and of different artists. They'll do a box set with like 33s or 45s, so you can have different ones. Now, 45s, basically, they're that smaller size. They only play about 2 minutes of music per side, so typically one song. A 33 and a third will play up to about, 20 minutes of music or so total. So that's the difference, the size difference and the amount of music in which it can hold and which it will play. And then you can get into all different types of other records, like 80 RPM diamond discs. That's a whole nother topic, 78 RPM, that kind of thing.
Actually,
And I think one of the things...
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was just saying, I think one of the things that you had shared when we had done one of our discussions before is that size that most of us equate to being a 45, you can have that same size record, but it doesn't necessarily play at a 45 speed. And I think that's when you were saying 33 and a third, most of us who are not music specialists or vinyl specialists think, 33 and a third, those are the big ones, and 45s are the small ones. And there can be 33s and the smaller size. So I think that...
Right. Yeah.
And you mentioned 78s. Jeannie was asking why 78s were so thick.
It was a different way to make vinyl then. I mean, vinyl, when 78s came out, they were very new. And so it's actually made from a thick shellac. And it's just different, that the music kind of changed as they realized that those 78s, one, they didn't hold very many minutes of music, and two, they were very cumbersome. And they break easily. So, of course, had to be a change at some point to a more playable and convenient format. And so 78s were invented first by Emil Berlinger. He was a German inventor. And he kind of took the cylindrical records and moved away from them and invented the 78, which at the time was really revolutionary. But then, you know, people saw the downfalls with that. So let's
actually one more related question, and this also circles back before you jumped into the grading situation. You made a reference to how, as a website that's, you know, manually maintained, that it can have some errors. You then also were talking about the marketplace. Evan Blatt has a comment that was saying one of the downfalls of Discogs is that the marketplace doesn't actually show what the seller is selling, only a title picture of the record searched. So what exactly is being maintained as an overall information source versus the marketplace? Is it kind of like a wiki page that anybody can go on and just edit it? Or is it really tied to a selling community that the sellers are responsible for maintaining the correct information?
Well, Discogs is like Wikipedia, so you can go on and edit information. That is true. But you'll find that with the marketplace, and Evan's right, and I should have mentioned this, but when you're shopping on Discogs, one of the things that's frustrating is you can only see like a picture of the album cover. You don't get really a picture of, you know, some of the other details sometimes that you wish the sellers would put in, and they don't always do that. So you kind of have to take the seller at their word when he says, you know, I'm selling this record, and it is actually what he says it is. I've never had a record come from Discogs where it was wrong. I have had people email me after they've listed a record and said, well, I've got other people working for me and they accidentally listed this as an original, but it's the reissue, so I'm refunding you. So I have had that happen, but, you know, just being careful, knowing what things are going for and knowing the details. And sometimes it's worth taking a risk because you can always contact the seller. And if they're a good seller, they'll work with you and correct the problem.
Excellent.
So let's take a look at some of the examples of various record pressings and what you're going to see when you're out there. So this is an example of an early wonderful American blues singer. This is Bessie Smith. She was the Empress of Blues and the highest paid performer of color of her time. And I wanted to show her page because there are some label variances here. You can see the different Columbia labels. Here's an example of one of the earlier Columbia labels. This particular, now these are 78s, came out in 1923. But then if you look at this one, you'll see that this one has a different label. So just again, showing some more label variances. This also came out in 1923, August of 1923. So you can really use these different label variances to help identify presses as well. So that's Bessie Smith. These are some early records, folks. These are going to be a little harder to find because 78s do tend to break. They're very fragile records and they get scratched easily. And if you can find some of these early 78s, they can be they can hold some value. Now this one is Jimmy Rogers. Now he's the father of country. And this is a 1927 release of Sleep Baby Sleep. Now this is interesting because this is on the Victor label. Now, if you notice this label here, it says Victor Talking Machine Company. Well, this was released before RCA acquired the Talking Machine Company in 1929. So this label here just has Victor Talking Machine with, of course, our famous nipper there. But if you go to this page here, this is Benny Goodman and his orchestra, a swing session with Benny Goodman. Its label is also Victor, but what you'll notice if you click on the details here on the bottom is you will see that it says RCA Victor, a company, Limited, Montreal, Canada. So this is a 1938 release on the RCA Victor label, and this is a label that was done after the acquisition. So those kinds of small, minute details really can help you identify records. The matrix number, of course, is always a great way, but looking and knowing that these other details exist really are very beneficial. Now, this record is the first pressing of this, and it came out in 4 shellac discs. Now, these early shellac records, you'll find sometimes when you get like a session or maybe a souvenir album book, they come in actually thick cardboard books, and there'll be a little kind of like binder system where it folds open and all of these records will be inside, because 78s cannot hold that much music. So you typically only have one song per side, sometimes two, I've heard. So you'll find that the earlier ones are in this style format. Now, if we look at the reissue of this, the reissue of this came out in 1943. It's still on shellac discs, but what you'll notice, the cover is completely different. And if you look at the details down here on the bottom, you'll see that this says RCA Radio Corporation of America, Camden, New Jersey. So the labels are similar, but they are very, very different. So that will help you when looking at records. Now, this record here is pretty cool. This is Tommy Dorsey with, of course, Frank Sinatra, Joe Stafford, and I love the Pied Pipers. This came out, and there's Louie all excited about this record. This came out in 1946, and this is just fantastic. Now, if we take a look at this record, you'll see the cover here. This is one of those typical folder styles. I'm calling it folder styles. There's probably a better terminology, maybe box set, with the different 78s. And take a look at this label here. So if we look at this originally came out on this label with that cover, and it was a 78 RPM set of discs. Now, if you look at the reissue of this, the reissue came out in 1951 on RCA, and it was reissued as a 33 1/3. So it's a completely different 33 1/3 versus 78, completely different record, really, all together. And then if you look at the covers are very different, and the labels are very, very different. Now, of course, 33 1/3 did not come out until 1948, and it was invented technically by RCA in the 30s, but at the height of the Great Depression, nobody wanted to spend money on new equipment and new records, so it ultimately failed. So Columbia kind of stole RCA's invention, and they came out with the 33 in 1948. But RCA kind of wanted to get back a little bit. So a year later, they released the 45, and basically they advertised the 45s in the fact that they would play as long as a 33 with their RCA changer. So I always find that interesting, and using those dates also can help you identify records. Just as we saw here, that earlier release of this record was on a 78, and there weren't 33s at that time. So that does help a little bit with that. Now, one of the other people that I absolutely love is Ma Rainey. Now, she is the mother of blues, and this is Honey, Where Have You Been on the Paramount label. And I wanted to showcase this record because the reissue of this came out on a label called Jazz Collector. Now, Jazz Collector is a British label known for its reissues of 20s recordings. So you'll find this a lot with records, that a lot of times some of these early records are hard to get, especially when you talk like 20s, 30s, sometimes even 50s records. So you'll find that different labels will come out and do reissues of some of these older records. And they'll put them, this one's interesting because it's actually a 78, and there's no year that it was released. I don't think anybody knows that. But you'll find that they will kind of reissue those. So you'll find that a lot with some of these older records. You can also get a lot of compilation albums. I have several of them featuring like 20s jazz or big band era music. I mean, they're everywhere. And usually you can spot those because they're on an odd label, or they'll say like collector's series or something like that. So just be aware that those things do exist. Now, this is a pretty cool album. This is Ella Fitzgerald, and who doesn't love Ella Fitzgerald? She's just got a voice. And this came out in 1947 on a 78 on the Decca label. Now take a look at that really cool cover. And this shows you a little bit of how these like folder box set 78 records are. They come in this really unique packaging. Now I want to note on this that this actually has a catalog number. If we look here, the catalog number is A473. You can see that right here. They've listed that as the catalog number. Now, the reissue of this, first of all, has a slightly different shade of color. It's not in the book. It came out on a 33 1/3 with a different decal label, and it has an entirely different catalog number, DL5084. So my point in showing this record is that you can't necessarily rely on catalog numbers as a good way to identify records, because sometimes the catalog numbers are different between pressings and sometimes they're exactly the same. So always, always, always double check that. Look at the matrix number. Look at those details, guys, on the covers, on the labels, and it will really help you identify some of those records.
And just as a clarification on the catalog number, is that something that will always appear only on the paper label on the disc, or will it also be on the artwork for the cover of the album?
Great question, Patrick. Yeah, most of the time you'll find it on the label and on the cover. But with the 78s, I'm not 100% sure if they were also featured on some of those older folder styles or not. But you'll always either find it on the cover, the back, or on the label as well. And then sometimes, and I'll show you this in a minute, you'll find that a record, when stereo came out and you had stereo or mono, you'll find on the back that it will have a catalog number saying you can also get this in monaural, and here is the catalog number for that. So you'll find that as well. So just look for those kinds of things on the label or on the record jacket itself. Now, this record here is one of my favorites. Of course, we all know Rockin' Robin. This was originally done not by the Jackson 5, but by Bobby Day. This came out in 1959, and this is a really tough record to find. I am very fortunate to own an original press of this. So exciting. But this record is reissued a lot, and people get it very, very confused. Now, I want to point out this. Now, if you look at this label here, it's on the class label, and you'll see that it has a catalog number of CS5002A. That's what's on this actual label here. And take a good look at that cover. Look how vibrant that cover is, and kind of how that tan color is. Now, let's look at the reissue of this. The reissue of this came out in 1973, and it came out on a totally different label. So here's the red class label. Now, the original was on the black class label, but note the catalog numbers. See, folks, they're exactly the same. That's where that can be really confusing. Also, take note of the cover. The cover is very different. You don't get that subdued tan color. His jacket is a little bit different than this cover. So see, the red, in my opinion, here is more of like a pinkish red. This is more of like a vibrant maroon red. So you'll notice the differences in those covers, and that can really help you identify records that way. Now, this record is another one of my favorites. And again, I'm very fortunate to own an original mono press of this. I love the Dells. The vocal group harmoning here, folks, is really, really amazing. And this came out on one of my favorite labels. This is the red VJ label. Came out in 1959. Now, take a look at that label. This is just really fantastic. I love, love, love this label. Now, I want to point out here that there's a matrix number here is 59-11268. Now, let's take a look at the reissue. Well, looky there. The matrix number is exactly the same. So that's confusing. But what's not the same is the label. So notice the previous one had that red VG label, and this one has the black VG label, which admittedly I don't think I've ever seen before, but it came out in the same year, and it's a mono reissue. Now, this record, when it came out, was so popular that they probably did press more copies of this. So this is all in the details, and it's just fascinating because you can really do a deep dive into these records and the presses and the details, and just going on Discogs and doing a couple of searches through the different presses that they have, you will be able to easily spot those differences and figure it out pretty quickly. Now, this one is Chuck Berry, 1 Dozen Berries, another record that I'm very pleased to own. I'm sorry to make all of you record collectors jealous here with some of the ones I've been lucky to find. But this is one of my very favorite Chuck Berry's albums. It's obviously got Sweet Little 16 and Reelin' and Rockin' and Rock and Roll Music. So many iconic songs for Chuck Berry on this. Now, the original was on a UK press, which we're seeing here. And let me show this here. If I click on Chuck Berry, you'll see that there are 33 different versions of 1 Dozen Berries. So that is where looking at these details do really matter, because now suddenly you not only have US pressings, you have Canadian pressings, UK pressings, Australia pressings, Japan, and they all came out, in different years. You'll see this one was a reissue on 180 gram vinyl on wax time. Now, 180 gram vinyl is a newer term that's basically just, it's complicated, but it's basically the thickness. It's a really thick record is the best way I can describe it to all of you guys that are learning here. 180 gram is not something that would have been around necessarily in the 50s. So when you find things like 180 gram or remastered for vinyl, or it has some sort of a hype sticker, typically those aren't going to be the older pressings because that's relatively new. So just look out for those kinds of things on records as well. So that is Chuck Berry. Now, this is fascinating, and I wanted to bring this record to the group here because I absolutely find misprints and misspellings just interesting. Like, how does that even happen? But it does. It happens. And this is one of the famed misprints. Now, this is a group called the Edsels. I love this song. Now, this is a very, very famous song. If you're into 50s music, you know this record. And the first one that came out was on dub. Now, when it came out, it wasn't actually a very popular record. But you can see here that they misprinted the record. It's Llama Rama Ding Dong on the label, but it should have been Rama Lama Ding Dong. So you'll see there's 2 versions on dub. They both came out in 1958, one with the correct Rama Lama Ding Dong, the other with Llama Rama Ding Dong. Now, collectors really want, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Collectors that really want this record and they're really interested in getting the true original want the one with the misspelling. So it actually increases its value in this case because people are searching for it and it's pretty hard to get the original. Now, what's also interesting is you'll see here that the reissue came out on Twin. Now, Twin Records reissued this, and you'll see here there's a promo listed, a 7-inch single promo, reissued this when the record actually finally got discovered and became really popular. So Twin then reissued it. So technically, you can also say that the Twin promo here, or the Twin record one on the Twin orange label, is also an original press. Technically, you could say that. And collectors do find that this Twin record of this particular record actually does sound better than the ones on dub. So when I was looking for this record, I talked to Johnny G over at Johnny G's Vinyl Treasure Show, who loves the 50s music, and he recommended that I get the Twin version, 1, because it sounded better, and 2, it was a little bit cheaper. The dub is very, very expensive. And there's also a lot of bootlegs on the dub. So you will find that there's a lot of Jamaican bootlegs. And the one that I bought originally on dub is actually a bootleg. I should have taken a picture of it to show you guys. But the vinyl is like very shiny. And it just seems too new to be an original. So always look out for those bootlegs. But now, this is
a quick question, specifically because of the, like you said, it's so rare with the misspelling, but the pressing between those first 2 dubs, those would have been the identical pressing. They just fixed the label, right? Or
Yes.
was it okay? Because it was just he didn't sing it wrong. They just typed the label wrong. So the cover,
Right.
and was it just the label on the disc itself, or was it the artwork on the album sleeve?
Now, I don't know how this was sold. It probably, I don't know if it came in like a generic white sleeve or if it came with a printed sleeve, but this is a 45, so it wouldn't have come in an album jacket.
Okay.
But yeah, they would have changed the label. But when you're talking collecting.
And do you have any idea of how many were made with the wrong label, and then how many got made once they fixed it?
You know, I wish I knew that, but I don't. I just know that I've looked up this record before, and it is almost impossible to find unless you're going to like specialty record shows or, 50s dealers. This is not something that you're going to come across probably on eBay very easily, unless it just magically turns up and somebody doesn't know what they have. And I see Evan saying that he owns the Edsel's first press with Llama Ding Dong before it was changed. And so even though the label was changed, they would still consider probably the Llama Ding Dong the true actual original press of that.
And Peterson is asking an interesting clarification as well for the twin, whether you consider that the reissue or the new master. It's still listed here on Discogs at least as Llama Rama. So did they reissue it with the misspelled label, or why does it still show the name spelled wrong?
Well, now this one is a promo. So this promotional record would have gone out to DJs and so forth. So I don't know why they've listed it that way, and if the promo was actually spelled wrong. That's something I don't know. But you can see that the other issues of this that came out on Twin actually are correct. So I don't know. That's something to do some more research into. And that really is a great point, is that when you get into vinyl, there are so many rabbit holes you can go down and so many interesting things to learn and so much detail with records. They're not all the same, which I just find so fascinating. Now, this next record is really fantastic, and we all love Etta James. I think, Nate, you're a big Etta James fan, aren't you?
Yeah, one of my favorites, one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, Etta James is great. Now, this record is really fantastic, and it's very famed. Everybody knows The Wallflower. But what's interesting about this is this actually came out in 1955 on a 78, and it was originally, if you look at the label here, Etta James and the Peaches, not Etta James. You'll also see that it's labeled The Wallflower with no markings under it. Other presses will say The Wallflower, parentheses, Dance With Me, Henry. Now, this is actually a response song to Hank Ballard and the Midnighters' 1954 version of Work With Me, Annie. So Work With Me, Annie came out a year earlier, and then her response song to that was Dance With Me, Henry. But this original record would have had it listed as Etta James and the Peaches and The Wallflower. Now, if you look at the later version that came out on Collectibles, now, guys, this Collectibles label, they do a lot of reissues of popular songs. You'll find this a lot. This is pretty easy to pick up for like a couple of dollars. It's not worth a whole lot. And when you see this label, you automatically know that it's not going to be an original of anything. However, you'll notice on this one, it says The Wallflower, parentheses, Dance With Me, Henry, and Etta James, not Etta James and the Peaches. Now, if you look at this page here, this is Etta James' page. That song came out on the record Miss Etta James. So I actually own this record, but I own the reissue of it because the original is really hard to find. So I own the reissue from 1962. But the 1961 release is very hard to find. And you'll notice on here, if you look at this, it's actually listed Dance With Me, Henry, not The Wallflowers. So they changed that at some point. So the single was released first and then added to the album. So just very interesting things to notice. The reissue also, later reissues will not have this crown logo of this on the bottom. It will have something different because there's many reissues of this. I believe there's a reissue, yes, like in the 70s and 80s. You'll find the reissue of it, and it's different. So always pay attention to those details. Miss Etta James is fantastic. Her records are very, very expensive and hard to find, especially the last record. I was just looking that up the other day, and I could not believe the prices that people wanted for this record. It's insane. And sometimes too, when you see the marketplace here and you see 423 for sale and you think, oh, from $1.16, well, that's probably because there's some sort of a bunch of reissues or CDs or whatever. So you can go in here to the United States, you can filter the shipping, and then you can filter album. And so you can do all kinds of filters, but you'll see here that this is the reissue. The covers are very, very similar, but they're different because one, this says stereo, and it doesn't have the same images that other cover had, the same details. So, you know, just be aware of this. This was released in 2019. So that's something that definitely pay attention to. Now, this is another favorite, I believe, of Nate. Can you tell us a little bit about Nina?
Well, you know, Nina is an incredible singer, songstress, activist. She died. I can't even tell you when she died. To be honest, I must have about 25 Nina Simone albums that I visit regularly. Whenever I found a CD with a new song on it that I didn't have, I would always buy the CD. I can't tell you, say that I know an awful lot personally about her.
Well, that is amazing, Nate, that you've got all the CDs and that you enjoy her music. And that's really a good point that you just made, Nate. You know, to me, folks, it's really all about the music. You know, these presses and identifying records are fascinating, and it's really important to know what press you have. But at the end of the day, it's all about enjoying the music. So if you don't have a first press or an original press, that's okay, as long as you are enjoying the music. You know, now as far as selling and values and collectability, you know, it is good to have certain pressings and good to know what you have, but just enjoy the music. Don't get too hung up on the different pressings, you know, unless that's something that you want to collect. You know, there are people that only collect white label promos. There are people that only collect original presses, but don't let the vinyl community dictate what you collect. I don't want to shame anyone, but I do find that there's this kind of need in the vinyl community to be really big on kind of record shaming a little bit about what press you have, and oh, that's not good if you don't have an original. Don't worry about all of that. Just enjoy the music, because that's, after all, what it's all about. So anyway,
I've got to say that that's an album that I don't have, and I'm not familiar with some of those tracks, so I might have to go out and find me this. Marriages for Old Folks, I don't know that. Blues on Purpose, I don't know that either. I'm definitely going to have to look out for this one.
Well, good, Nate. I've inspired you to enjoy some more of her music. Now, this is Nina Simone. I Put a Spell on You. Now, what's interesting about this is that the original was done by, of course, Screaming Jay Hawkins in 1956. And a lot of artists cover each other's songs. I was just talking about this with Peterson. She said, oh, I love that song, Constantinople. And I said, oh, yeah, who was the group that originally did that? I can't remember. And she mentioned another group. And I said, no, that's not it. It's from the 50s. And it was the Four Lads that originally did that. Well, this was originally done by another artist, but Nina Simone has put her own style onto it. So there are certain records that have covers of songs that people are actually interested in picking up because the version is different and they prefer that version. So it's really all subjective. Music is very subjective, so you can pick what version you like and what you're looking for. Now, I wanted to point this particular record out because all of the originals of this on the Philips label are very easy to find. You know, vinyl, a lot of times, especially when you get into like the 60s and 70s, they were pressed in mass numbers. I mean, huge numbers would come out for an original press. So sometimes you can find these really inexpensively. And this one is a special record because it is not your average release on Philips. This record here is actually a promo record. Now, I wanted to show this because you will see it says for broadcast only, not for sale. So this was a promotional record that was given out to the different broadcasting radio stations, DJs, however you want to say that. And this record, because it's a promo, can go for a lot more money. It's more valuable because it's a promo. And not all promotional records are on the white label. You hear people say, you know, oh, that's a white label promo. Well, not all white labels are promos, and not all promos are on white labels. So this is a great example of this. This is a broadcast record, and people like the promotional records because they're a little bit earlier than the ones that were released to the public, you know, just as Vinylize talked about earlier in that video we saw. So you can see the solds on this record, the median price. Now, of course, these kind of depend on condition. The median sold at $75. The highest was $125. Now, if we go in here to the marketplace, currently this particular pressing, well, wow, there's definitely a variance in prices here.
Yeah.
You can see that the sleeve condition is just very good. The media condition is very good plus, selling for about $124 US. But then there's one shipping from the United States selling for $400. So you can see a little bit, I don't want to talk too much on it, but the difference in prices. But knowing, though, that this is a promotional record, you can definitely see that it's worth a little bit more than if I had just clicked on the average Nina Simone, I Put a Spell on You. If you look for that record here, you'll find that, and I can't find it, but if you look it up, folks, you'll see that it's not selling as much as that promo. So very interesting. Now, this is another record that everybody loves. This is the quintessential Christmas album, in my opinion. If I could only have one Christmas album, I would only have Bing Crosby, Merry Christmas. Now, originally, this was on a 78 in 1945, but they had kind of the official version of this, as collectors say, came out in 1955, and this is the one everyone and their brother is looking for. This is the holy grail of Christmas albums, in my opinion, and collectors really, really want the true first pressing of this, but this was reissued like crazy. So let's take a little deep dive into this Merry Christmas album. You're going to see this a lot when you're out shopping. Maybe not the original, because the original is a little tougher to find, but the reissue, you're going to find that pretty much everywhere. And they even sell current reissues of this record. I have seen it Barnes & Noble and other places that sell mass vinyl. So if we take a look at the original one from 1955, look at the silver Decca label. When you find this record, one, you can look up the matrix number, as I've talked about before, but just knowing that originally it came out on the silver Decca label, immediately you know you have a true original because it came out on the silver Decca label. The reissue did not. The reissue always has the colorful Decca label. So you can see the differences in the labels. And by just knowing that little fact, when you guys are out looking at this record, which comes up a lot, you'll know, oh, okay, I've got the reissue of this. You know, and actually I own both of these records, the reissue and the original, because my grandparents got the original and then they bought the reissue because they liked it so much. And they wanted a cleaner copy. The original that they have, they had really loved it so much that it had worn down a little bit. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have both. And I was so excited when I was going through their record collection and I found this record, and Dad can tell you, I probably about screamed because I had been looking for this record for so long and they just had it sitting in a box in the closet. So anyway, this is just definitely one to be on the lookout for. Great song list too on this. I mean, you've got White Christmas, famous song. That version by Bing Crosby is just the best. Jingle Bells, you know, all of your classic Christmas is going to be found on this album. So it's very sought after by collectors. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Beach Boys. We all love the Beach Boys, and they really have made some great music in the 60s. Now, this is Surfer Girl, and I wanted to show this particular record because you'll see that this one here is the stereo pressing. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, But there are records, and let me see if I can zoom in, that also came out with 2 versions. So can you see here? It's listing also available in monaural. Now that might be a little hard to see, but that little logo on the back tells you that the record came out in 2 versions. Basically, stereo is a sound of instruments and voices that can now be placed on either the left or right channel, sort of like a concert orchestra. But mono only uses one audio channel. So stereo was a very new concept. And so at the time that a lot of these records were released, they would have made them available in stereo or mono. Now, stereo originally came out in 1958. It was actually invented by Alan Bunman in the 30s, but it wasn't really perfected and released to the general public until 1958. So stereo and mono are 2 different types of presses that you will see when looking at records. And collectors prefer different versions. For me personally, when I can find a mono record, there's just something magical about it. To me, it's almost like listening to the record the true way the artist intended, the original way that they made music. So there's different opinions on this, and there's certain records that people prefer in mono. There's certain records people prefer in stereo, and it's really all preference. But because there is demand for certain stereo or mono records, it does matter which pressing you have, whether you have a stereo or a mono, because in the world of Beach Boys, this Surfer Girl in stereo doesn't sell for as much as the mono version does. The mono is actually more desirable. I tried to get the mono, but I could only get the stereo. So those are things that you want to be aware of too when you're collecting records. Okay, so now we finally made it to the Beatles, and this is the famed Beatles White Album that everybody talks about. This album is really, really highly sought after. Now, there are many versions of this record, but true collectors want the original press of this, and the original press is almost impossible to find. The dead wax will have, it's 001, I believe, and the dead wax is the famed matrix number for this record. But you'll notice that it's not on the Capitol label, it's actually on the Apple label. And another detail that's interesting about this record is, let's zoom in a little bit and see how you actually get the record out of the jacket. So if you notice on this record, if I zoom in a little bit here, you see how the sides have seams? Well, you can't pull the record out of the side of the jacket like most records are. So the true first press or original press of this is actually top loading. The record comes out of the top. So wow. The true actual original press of this will have the Apple label, 001 matrix number, and will load from the top. And that is the most desirable Beatles record. I think everybody wants this record. And they didn't make many copies of that top loading. I don't know how many exactly. I did see a video on it, but you can see the highest price in 2021 sold for $674. So that's where knowing your different presses really, really matter. And you'll see that there are different versions of this record. If we click on this, it will show that there are many different versions. The website seems to be having some issues, but you can look for this record. There we go. And you'll see that there are many different versions of the Beatles White Album. These are all of the Beatles records here. And the White Album is not coming up, but it's in the list. So you can go through and see that there are different versions, and you can pick up a non-top loading version for a heck of a lot less than you can the top loader version. Now, this record here is another great example of records that have things that are kind of carved into the dead wax. I talked about the dead wax having, of course, that information that we all look for called the matrix number. Well, sometimes different mastering engineers will also put their little signature or initials. And this record is Led Zeppelin II. This came out in 1969, and this is the most sought after press of this record because it has the RL, which is Robert Ludwig. He's a master engineer, very legendary, and everybody wants the Robert Ludwig press of Led Zeppelin too. So knowing that this exists, knowing there are details within the dead wax to pay attention to, and those special messages can really help you in identifying records. And now, if you have Led Zeppelin 2, go check it out. See if you have the RL press, because that's pretty hard to get, and definitely one that collectors are super excited about finding. And Louis loves that Robert Ludwig press. So excited about all of these records. Now, of course, this is Queen and Night at the Opera. Gosh, I love Queen. They just made some magic with their music. This came out in 1975. And this is the Night at the Opera record that, of course, features Bohemian Rhapsody. We all know and love Bohemian Rhapsody. And this record here is one that has been reissued a lot. And they just reissued a Queen box set. Now, I wanted to point this out because the Queen box set has the same cover art and label as the original Queen Night at the Opera. Of course, you can probably tell the differences because those covers will be pretty new, and usually vintage vinyl will have some sort of wear on the cover unless the person never ever played the record. So this is one that is reissued quite a bit. Obviously, Bohemian Rhapsody is very famed, very popular, very sought after. Queen, definitely, I've seen an uptick in the collector's market for Queen because of the movie Bohemian Rhapsody. Everyone watched that movie, and now they all suddenly wanted Queen. So you'll find that there are tons of reissues of this album. I mean, you can see just the various presses here. So definitely check your matrix numbers and those details to make sure you have an original Queen Night at the Opera, if that's something you're looking for. And I wanted to point this out too. Because of the uptick in the market for Queen, and of course the movie made it very popular, you'll find that some sellers suddenly want to mark up their vinyl because suddenly, oh, it's Queen. Everybody likes Queen. So I'm going to charge $80 for this record. Well, it may not be worth $80. So knowing your presses, knowing what the market value for some of these records are will really help you when you're collecting. Just be aware that those things do exist. Now,
really quick question, because I was actually going to ask that as a question just in values. I know we're really not covering values, but as we talk about this increased interest, does the availability of a large number of reissues, should it have, or does it have for legitimate resellers, an impact on the price of an original issue or original master?
I do think it affects the price a little bit, sure, because if there's a lot of reissues, people that are just getting into the vinyl hobby might go to your local Best Buy, your local big box store, Urban Outfitters, and buy some of these reissues. Because a lot of these reissues like Queen, Elton John, Boston, your bigger 70s and 80s records, those are going to be available at some of your big box stores. And so a lot of people are just buying the reissue because they don't know the differences. They're not far down in that collecting journey yet. So they'll buy those. And so sometimes, yes, that can affect values. But knowing, these tools are available to help you identify records really does help. So if you're someone that's reselling vinyl and you're at a estate sale, antique store, wherever, and you see, Elton John, Yellow Brick Road, and I'll show you here how to tell that it's an original, you can go to Discogs, look it up, and you can find easily that information out. And that definitely will affect its price, because now suddenly you have a true original press that, collectors that are really looking for that want, and that can affect its value. Elton John is one that was released a lot. He was, of course, very popular, and this album is very sought after. I've been looking for an original of this. I don't have it. There are the reissues available to buy, but because in true collector fashion, I want the original of this. It's hard to get. But one of the things I wanted to show on this particular record is if you look at this record and look at the cover, there is no barcode on this record. Now, the original came out in the UK press on the DJM label. The US pressing would have been on the RCA label. This is a record that does not have that barcode on the back. Now, Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about when barcodes actually came out?
Barcodes got introduced in the mid 70s, I think 73 or 75, and they were primarily used in the grocery store setting, but equipment wasn't available across the country at that time. So they really didn't get wide place use until the 80s, but they were at least introduced. So if you have one, it can't be before, I think, 73. It might be 76. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Pop quiz.
Yep, perfect, Patrick. So if you find records that have a barcode, that's another identifier that might help you realize, I don't think that record is very old in the world of vinyl, especially like if you're collecting 50s records or 40s big band, you see a barcode. Okay, well, that might not be an original because it's got a barcode on it. And that's a great example here of this Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. This is a record that's been remastered. So that's another term that you'll find. And, there's different things on that. When you get into vinyl in the world of collecting and people in music, they all have opinions on, oh, that remaster sounds horrible, or they didn't do a good job, or that engineer is not as good as... That's a whole rabbit hole you can go down. And if you want to research that and you're really into music, then absolutely geek out on that because it's fascinating. And, the more you listen, you train your ear. But this record really does show that it's the newer release. One, because here you can see it's listed as a remaster and it's got the barcode on the back. So it's not the one from 1973 because the one from that would have been on this label without the barcode on the back. So those are some identifiers that you can find as well. Now, I think this record is one that's special to Patrick. I know that he loves the Violent Femmes, and I think you have a little story about them, don't you?
Actually, yes, the Violent Femmes. I'm coming up to my 51st birthday, and I went and saw the Violent Femmes for my 21st birthday. Got a speeding ticket on the way to see it. So many fond memories of the Violent Femmes. My first experience in a mosh pit, and it was a absolutely fantastic time, at least what I remember of it.
That's wonderful, Patrick. And music really can bring back so many memories and feelings and special events. And that's kind of the cool thing about collecting vinyl too, is you remember where you got certain records from. And so when you pull that record out, it's like, oh yeah, I found that in a bin for $1, or I was with my dad when I found that, or my best friend and I were at a record show and we got that. That's kind of the cool thing about also collecting physical media and vinyl, is that memory associated with it. So this is the Violent Femmes, and this record I wanted to show because you'll notice that there are different releases that all came out in the same year, but there are different countries of origin. So, we constantly hear things like this is the UK press versus the US press. So you'll notice that the labels are different here. This Violent Femmes album that came out in the UK in the same year was on the Rough Trade label. And of course, there are labels that have like subsidiaries. So, a label might have several like subsidiary labels or other connections. So you'll find that as well. There's a whole history on labels that you can go down a whole rabbit hole researching. But
a question related to this, I hadn't really thought of it this way. So in this case, American band, it was released in the US first. But for U.S. collectors, are they always going to be looking for the first press or the first master, or do they want the first American master because we're a bunch of xenophobes and we don't care what other countries do?
Well, that's interesting. It really boils down to the sound. And sound, like I said, is very subjective. So some collectors claim that certain pressings sound better. And so maybe they want the Canadian pressing for some weird reason. Maybe, so it kind of does depend, but most of the time people are looking for the original press of an album. But that is not always the case. As I've shown through this whole presentation, there's a bunch of different details and things. And when you get to certain records, you'll find that, especially like with Kiss, for example, they had a lot of records that were released in Japan, the Japanese pressings, that are actually more desirable than the US pressings. because they're rare, they're harder to find, they have different sounds. And, collectors really want that. It's kind of part of the collector mentality too. So some people actually might own this album and then they want all the other pressings of this album to then see how they're different and have just the category of the different pressings. So
I know you're specializing in the older vinyl, but is there an era or is there a time at some point where even American labels tended to get that first master done overseas?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I'll have to do some research on that. That's the thing with vinyl is there is so many things to learn. You're always constantly learning. You're always doing research and finding things. I always learn from other collectors. I mean, by no means am I an expert on vinyl at all, and I think you kind of become an expert too in a certain era that you collect. I'm really into the 50s vinyl. So I know a lot more about those labels and those artists than I do maybe 70s. Now there's a lot of great music from the 70s. I love Elton John. I love Billy Joel. I love Boston. There's so many good artists and lots of amazing music to discover, but there's always new things that you're constantly learning. And that's the wonderful world of vinyl is you never stop learning. You never stop seeing new things. And that's always fun. So this is Michael Jackson Thriller. Of course, we all love Michael Jackson. He's just got a way with dance and his voice is fantastic. This Thriller album is one that I wanted to point out. It came out in 1982. And this one I see a lot of pretty much everywhere. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is this one, when it came out on the Epic label, did have a barcode because, of course, it came out in 1983. But also, this record is one that a lot of people kind of have this mentality of, oh, just because it's Michael Jackson Thriller, it's suddenly worth like thousands of dollars or it's worth like hundreds of dollars or whatever it is. That's not 100% true. You'll find that if you go to the marketplace, you can get this. Well, now, and the condition on some of these are not great. So there is that. But in VG Plus shape, with this particular original pressing, you could buy it right now for $6.
$6, right?
So if you see it places, just I wanted to bring that up. Just be aware. Same with like certain other records that have gained a lot of popularity because their songs and the artists are so popular. It doesn't mean that they're suddenly worth $60. So use Discogs and other websites, as a tool when you're out shopping for records, especially if it's one that you want, to say, oh, okay, that record really isn't worth that much, so I'm not going to pay that price. Now, of course, if you want it, go for it by all means, but just be aware that there are people that don't know as much about records, and so they might see Michael Jackson Thriller and think, oh, that's just suddenly worth, that must be so hard to find. But that's why Discogs and all of these websites and those details do matter. This is the reissue of this album. And of course, I'm on Best Buy. Best Buy sells a lot of greatest hits, compilations, different, vinyls here. And this is a picture disc. So the reissue is actually a picture disc. And there is a market for picture discs. A lot of collectors love picture discs for the fact that they're just cool. They're a novelty record. They're not meant to sound very good. The picture is sandwiched literally between two layers of thin vinyl. It's not, made to be the greatest audiophile pressing in the world, but it's just kind of cool. So you can buy this picture disc for $22 on Best Buy. So it is currently there. Now, this record here is pretty cool. This is Kiss Me Kate, and I'm going to let Patrick talk a little bit about this, but this is the original cast from 1949, and I wanted to briefly mention vinyl that is related to movie musicals and, of course, stage musicals, because a lot of Broadway albums mention that they have the original cast, but it may not be the true first cast, because it could be the original cast for that Broadway production, but you kind of have to go online and do some research to find out who was actually in the first original Broadway production to verify that you do have the first original Broadway for that production. And sometimes there are movie versions. Grease is a great example of this. It is such a popular album right now. And I have the original production from New York, but there are the movie versions available to buy for a whole heck of a lot less. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about Kiss Me Kate and this particular record here.
Yeah, so Kiss Me Kate was one of the what I felt was an interesting example to kind of cover a couple little subcategories within collecting vinyl, because vinyl has its own terms, collecting has its own terms, but in the theater community, which if people follow my channel, I'm actually interested in, and I actually perform in community theater. A recording like this that would be from the Broadway production would be considered a cast recording, and then there would be the soundtrack would be from a movie. Now, the terms get interchangeably used, so this is one of those interesting parts of Discogs, what people are using as their terms when they're the sellers. But if it's a Broadway recording, it's a cast recording. If it's a movie, it is a soundtrack. And Kiss Me Kate has a specific specialty behind it, because it's actually the cast recording from the 1948 production, was actually the very first musical to ever win a Tony Award for Best Musical. It was the third year they were issuing the Tonys. The first 2 years they didn't issue a Best Musical. So for 1949 was the Best Musical Tony Award to Kiss Me Kate for this 1948 production. And then it's the 1948 cast recording that went on to win a Grammy. And again, it got its own recognition through other music awards. And what Katie's saying is something that's very common. Grease would be another perfect example. Kiss Me Kate has been it's considered a revival done, every 15 to 20 years on Broadway. And then each time the revival is done, that cast would create a new cast recording. So it's still considered the original cast recording, but it would be considered the cast recording of the revival. So there would be the earliest version of that recording would have those actors. So unless you go back and figure out, who starred in the original productions and hope they didn't revive their role at a later production, it's like its own little history encapsulation, all just to know which ones became the movies, which ones became which versions were done for the Broadway. And there will be certain people, and I fall in that camp, I would be more interested in collecting the Broadway cast recordings because of the true sound and the production values done on a stage from a stage cast.
Exactly. And I have a big collection of musicals on vinyl. I love musicals. I'm a big theater nerd. And so I always look for the true original cast as well, Patrick. I just think it's amazing. This here, you can see that there are notes, and that's the wonderful thing about Discogs. Now, sometimes you have to verify the notes. As I said, this isn't perfect. This is sort of a Wikipedia for records, but for the most part, it's pretty accurate. And you'll see here that it says the original recording was on Columbia, which we can see here. Capitol issued a new recording with many of the same participants. However, Edwin Clay does not appear on the later one. So if you look at that reissue on Capitol, you'll find that his name does not appear on the jacket. So that is ways to kind of help identify that as well. So great different versions there, Patrick. Now this is getting into the 90s, and we're going to start wrapping up the show with the 90s, because in the 90s, vinyl went out. Vinyl was no longer, and CD was in. Now, there are true music enthusiasts that really, really loved vinyl and still were on a crusade to collect vinyl and have vinyl in the 90s, but, that had kind of gone away, and now we're moving into CDs. So in the 90s, you're not going to find a ton of bands actually issued on vinyl. And some of these bands from the 90s, when you do find that they actually had a vinyl record release, they can be very, very hard to find, and they're very collectible because people want original presses from the 90s. And so this is a great example. This is a Third Eye Blind record, great group on Electrica. This came out in 1997. And what's pretty neat about this particular record is this is the self-titled record, and there are no reissues. So if you look down here, there's a CD album, and the rest is cassette and CD. So if you look at this particular vinyl, you'll know that there are no reissues. So it helps to kind of know those things, because if you find this record, you've got a stone cold original. Now, the last 90s album I want to show is They Might Be Giants. This is Flood. I was actually recently watching a video on this, and someone had found the reissue of this. And this record came out in 1990, January 15th. And this record is pretty cool because there were 2 reissues with different color variants. And this is what I want to talk about wrapping up the show. Another type of pressing is basically a color variant. And what that means is that the record is pressed on colored vinyl. And there's all different types of colored vinyl that you can get these days. There's swirl and smoke vinyl and vinyl that sometimes actually has like moving things within the vinyl. There's vinyl that could be pressed on not just solid red or solid yellow, but maybe it's got like red, yellow, and green in it. And so there's different variants now. That's kind of the big thing to do, is release a vinyl record and have a certain variant. And they may only produce that variant for a limited time. So a record store day is a great example of that. You guys know I'm a big fan of going to record store day and supporting your local record stores. I'll line up hours in advance just to get one record that may only be released on record store day, and they may only press 1,500 copies of that in the red variant. And then they may reissue that album and say it comes out in the black. Well, the black might be really easy to get, but the red is probably going to be harder. And so knowing that you have a unique variant is very important. So this record, They Might Be Giants, is super hard to find if you find an original press, but you can get the reissue. And what's interesting is this reissue is on the green translucent vinyl. So you'll see this here. Here's the green translucent vinyl. But apparently when they press this, I believe the green is a little bit easier to get. I guess the yellow variant, and I'd have to look up how many copies they actually did of this, if there is even record of it. I don't think there's many of the yellow. So you'll see here that it's a limited edition. The yellow variant last sold on June 20th, 2021 at the highest price of $100. There is only one currently in this yellow variant for sale in the marketplace at the moment, selling for $111. So even though it's a reissue, certain variants can be very, very collectible because of the color, and people just find the novelty of that really, really cool. And this is where I wanted to highlight that comment again in the marketplace. See, you can't see a picture of the label. That is one of the downfalls to on the marketplace, is that you sometimes can't see all the details as you can, as if you were looking with the more images feature on the page. So you kind of have to take that seller, take his word, and hope that what he's describing is accurate. But, you know, you can always reach out if there's a problem, and a good seller will fix it. So those are really all the different kinds of variants and different pressings that you're going to run into. And I hope through this presentation that you've really gotten a chance to see how many different combinations of things are out there as far as your record label, your matrix number, your catalog number. You know, learning all of that takes years, but being able to use a tool like Discogs or PopPsych or 45Cat, all of those things, and some Google searching and digging and talking to other collectors will really help you identify presses. So when you're out there now, hopefully you know what you're looking at, and you can always pull up Discogs on your phone. I do that a lot. I always grab my phone, go to Google, go to Discogs, and look up a record really quickly when I'm at a store. And that is really a great tool to know what kind of records you have. And this is a great example. I was with my dad, as I mentioned, shopping when he came to visit, and Dad pulled out of the bin an original press of the Chirping Crickets. And this was a UK press from 1957. And it was just so exciting that we found this record for only $30, but it was a great memory and a great time shopping. So hopefully you guys won't be afraid of vinyl, what kind of presses you have. You'll now be informed with all the right tools to identify records. And at the end of the day, folks, just really enjoy the music.
That is a great way to end it. Enjoy the music.
Yep, indeed.
So thank you, folks, for tuning in tonight. We will have the next triptych on Nate's channel. So Nate, why don't you tell us what your next triptych is going to be about?
I will be talking about Wedgwood, in particular Jasper Ware. I know there are a lot of people that have become quite interested in Jasperware. Certainly my Instagram posts with Wedgwood Jasperware get the most likes out of anything that I post. So that's what I'll be talking about.
Fantastic. I can't wait to learn more about Wedgwood, because that is something that I don't know a ton about, but I've learned a lot through Nate, and I can't wait for him to share his knowledge with you folks. It is just going to be really fantastic. So tune in to Soul Nate next Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a lot of fun. Another great learning opportunity. Share this video with your friends, with your family, and tell everyone about the triptych, and that we will be doing all kinds of topics. The sky really is the limit with this. So Patrick, what do you have coming up next on your channel?
Well, just right before this video started, I posted a video regarding some of the activities scheduled for October and November, including planning for the Doxy fundraiser. So people can take a look at that, and it includes a collaboration that I've issued for my birthday, which frighteningly enough is coming up on October 12th. So people can take a look at that. And then this Wednesday, I will be doing a duo dive for those who may not have caught on yet. Katie and I have joined forces, and my deep dives on her show and tells have become duo dives. And on my channel this Wednesday, we will have Cindy from Mimi's Treasure Cottage talking about her collection of vintage cake toppers, specializing in the Halloween designs that she has in her collection.
Fantastic. That is just going to be awesome, Patrick. I'm very much looking forward to that. Now, folks, come back tomorrow. I'm doing something special on my channel. I will be doing a live Jell-O tasting with another yucky Jell-O recipe from the 50s. So if you want some laughs, come tune back in for that. And of course, for lots of fun duo dives and triptychs in the future with some great vintage learning and information. So that is going to do it for us folks tonight on the triptych. I am so grateful that you guys all tuned in and hopefully learned a little something. If you have any questions about vinyl, I am not the expert by any means, but I am always happy to help share my knowledge. So the email is down below if you need to clarify anything or you want to email me. I'm always happy to talk records with you guys. So feel free to shoot me an email. And I hope, as always, folks, that you guys will stay in, stay safe, bend YouTube, and keep spinning that vinyl. Bye-bye now.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, buddy. Bye, everyone.